Hey guys, got a really interesting, fun game to share with you today, and the lesson in this is the use of the rooks. And I think for us as beginners, improving intermediate players compared to masters, one of the things that you notice is that very often for beginners, the rooks tend to hang around, not do anything, not do too much until the end of the game, but they're really powerful pieces. Okay, so in this game, this is a 10-minute blitz game. I'm playing Dewey Stubbs from the USA, rated 1392, and I open with e4. My opponent plays e6. This is the French defense, so he's given me the opportunity to grab the center. Why not go ahead and grab the center? He doesn't play d5 straight away. He plays c6 first. So I think bringing out my minor pieces on my king side will help me to castle sooner if I want to castle king side. So I go ahead and bring up my knight to f3. Now he plays d5 and I advance to e5, closing up the position in the middle of the board. Black plays g6, so he's obviously telegraphing the fact that he's going to play fianchetto his bishop there to g7, probably castle kingside. So I decide to play c3. This does a couple of things. Of course, it strengthens my center. So if c5 is played and maybe c takes d, I can recapture with the c pawn. But also, in addition, it blocks off this diagonal should Black's dark squared bishop ever want to come and check my king, so I don't want that. So sensible-ish move. I have played 3-4 pawn moves already in the first 5 moves. Black's bishop indeed comes to g7, like we imagined. And I'm deciding to play aggressively and actively in this game. I'm channeling Morphy and Fischer and players like that. So bring my dark squared bishop out to g5, attacking Black queen. Obviously bishop can't get in the way because there's a pawn there on e5, so he takes the opportunity to protect his queen, shields his queen with the knight, and also prepares to castle. But that's fine because I'm expecting him to castle kingside, so I'm thinking, okay, let's prepare an attack down the kingside as well. So I want to get my pieces all lined up, focusing on that corner of the board. All right. So bishop to d3 just gets my bishop into a useful space. It now allows me to castle short if I want to. Black castles short, I castle short as well. And the queen now comes out to d7, which is a slightly odd move. I mean, this queen now has only 3 squares it can move to without being captured. Whereas before when it was on d8, it could have come out here and had access to more of the board. So I also move my queen up to d2. I am conscious that it now is blocking my knight out from getting to d2, but I'm not intending on leaving my queen there for long. Of course, I was thinking, what else can I do with my knight at this point? So I had a look at, is there an idea of a3, but then these 2 squares are both covered by this nice pawn pyramid that Black's got. So the idea is that my queen's going to vacate that square, and then my knight will be able to come in and hopefully then come up to the king side of the board. Black now plays a nice move, knight to f5. And I had a think here. 14 seconds, this is my longest think so far in the game. The knight can't come to e3. Likewise, it can't come to g3. It can't actually go to h4 either because of my knight. So I'm thinking this knight, and it really, I don't know if it wants to go here to h6. It might not be too bad. It is defended. No, because I've got. If it did that, I've got my bishop and my queen lined up against it. So I figure let's go for it. Let's spice things up. g4, moving the pawn directly in front of my king. But it's a closed position, right? It's a closed position. These rooks aren't a threat. This knight hasn't entered the game yet. This bishop can't even move at all. And this queen, since it moved to d7, can't get anywhere near my king. So I'm figuring, let's take this opportunity. There is nothing happening by way of attacks. There's no real threats, apart from this knight has decided to come into my territory. I don't want that. I'm going to stamp it out, chase the knight away. Knight retreats back to e7. And now I've committed that g-pawn. Of course, pawns can't move backwards. They can only move forwards. So what should I be doing here? I should be bringing the rest of my pieces into the attack and try and launch while black still has all of these pieces lounging around on the queen side doing nothing. Let's launch a horrific attack and just blast our way through. So I move my queen to f4, which now gives my knight a space there on d2. Black plays b5. My knight starts to move in. Black plays a5, okay? But I'm not worried. My king isn't down the queen side, so this pawn storm down the queen side is not a matter of concern for me. But I do spot here that my knight can go from d2, and if it's able, getting in there to c5 might be quite good. Really put pressure on black's position. This is what we call an outpost, because both of these pawns, the b pawn and the d pawn, are now kind of in front of or alongside my knight, so neither of them can go backwards. So my knight is pretty much assured a happy home and a pretty safe home there on c5. It's also blocking the c6 pawn from advancing and causing me any problems, so that's what I want to do. Black actually allows me to do that, and so I move my knight straight into c5. The queen now moves back to e8, and I start to think about attacking. This is a very common idea when you've got this fianchettoed bishop in front of the king. If your own bishop and queen can line up, to get your bishop into there. So basically what's happened is, because this pawn has moved from g7 to g6, it means that the dark squares around the king are actually weaker. Okay, because that pawn is not protecting f6 and it's not protecting h6, right? There are no pieces, in fact, covering those squares. Those squares are fairly weak. They're only reinforced by the presence of this bishop on g7. So if I can swap off that bishop and leave my queen on h6, okay, that gives me great opportunities, not least beautiful knight into g5, and then the queen could come in there with a checkmate. So black would be a fool to take my bishop at that point and allow my queen to sneak into his king's position. Black plays knight to a6, threatening my knight. And so I have a look at this. I figure if black takes me and then I recapture with a pawn, I'm going to end up with these doubled pawns, and then this d pawn might have some options. So I decide it's probably better to take, let the rook recapture, and I can just carry on with my own ideas. That knight wasn't really taking part in my attack, and this game's all about my attack. Okay, so I take the bishop, and king recaptures, because it's a forcing move. It gives me time. Okay, black still hasn't managed to do anything really aggressive with his own pieces. So what I'm thinking now is rook swinging, and this is the key point of this game, really. Something that I see better players doing quite often is bringing your rook into the game, and sometimes it means taking a move or two to get your other pieces out of the way. But this rook now has the opportunity to weave through and attack down here, and I've got possibly queen there to h6 as well. and then queen to h7 would be checkmate. Okay, so it's always a good idea to have an attacking plan in mind, even if it's going to take 4 moves. That's okay. Sometimes an attack can take 4 moves, but your opponent literally cannot stop the attack. Okay, I'm not saying that's the case in this game, but always good to be thinking about. So black plays a decent move, swings his rook across to h8, and I think, okay, carry on with the plan. Queen to f8, carry on with the plan. Bishop to d7, carry on with the plan. Okay, so now I have this gorgeous rook in front of my h-pawn, with my king safely behind. The board is locked up, closed up there on the queen side pretty much. And this pawn is of course pinned. So what can we do now? Now this is a decent move. Okay, so I like this move a lot, bringing the knight there to g8, because that knight is now protecting h6 and f6. So my queen would love to come into one of these squares, but that knight is doing a great job of defending both of those squares. So I think, well look, I've got another rook there. I've got a rook there sitting on a1, it's not doing anything, it's not part of the game, it's not part of the attack. Bring him into the attack, let's do it. All right, double down, let's get all of our pieces lined up, pointing at black's king and causing threats and making black sweat. That's the whole point. Look at black's pieces. This rook on a6 is doing nothing at all. Right? Even if I gave black 3 or 4 moves, that rook isn't going to be 3 moves. That rook isn't going to be part of the game. This bishop also, every single one of black's pawns, right? They're all on the light squares, and he's got a light squared bishop only. He doesn't have a black square bishop. Black squared bishop would have free reign to dodge through on the diagonals. White's light squared bishop, completely useless. Okay, so I think this is a little bit dubious, this particular move. I only spent 6 seconds thinking about it, but f5 at this point, I've already got a lot of pieces lined up down there. Okay, so I've got plenty of options. I've got g takes f5, of course. And then what's black going to do? Is he going to recapture? I've got a bishop there looking at it. I've got the queen there behind it. I've got rooks threatening to come into the game. And I also noticed that I've got e takes f6, so I can capture that pawn en passant. Okay, so what you need to do in these situations is visualize what would it look like if I took with the g pawn. What would it look like if I took en passant with the e pawn? And I decide that getting rid of my e-pawn is not a bad thing, because if it vacates this square, possibly my queen could move to e5, attacking the king and the rook. This could be very tasty. So it also comes with check. So e takes f6 en passant. Comes with check. The queen could capture at this point in time. It might even be better for the king to move to f7, and this is a tactic that it's always worth bearing in mind. Okay, if you think about it, it's nice to have one of your own pawns or one of your own pieces in front of your king as a bodyguard to protect your king, right? But your opponent's pieces can still take that piece. Your opponent is not allowed, it's illegal for your opponent to take one of their own pieces. Okay, so particularly with a pawn, if you can get a pawn right in front of your king, okay, then you can use that pawn as a human shield, and your opponent can never get through that piece because it's his own piece. And pawns can only take diagonally, so your king can sometimes be very safe. So maybe that was a good move. Black does decide to capture the queen. Now I have to think, do I want to exchange queens at this point and go into an ending? I'm probably better, but I figure, I'm in this for a victory. I don't really want to grind one out at this point in time. So I move my queen back to e3 so that my queen lives to fight another day. I'm thinking as well now that my knight has got nice opportunities. That's a lovely square, e5. That's another nice outpost. It hits the bishop. It hits these squares around the king as well. Black does something with his rook, and I come in with the knight to e5. Rook comes across to defend the bishop, but I would be a fool to exchange this awesome, terrifying knight that I've just got into one of the best possible squares. Right? Knights love to be in the middle of the board, where it controls 8 squares. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, look at all those squares my knight is controlling, and it's protected by his own pawn, and there's no enemy pawn that can come and threaten him. Right, this is an awesome knight. This is a knight of the apocalypse. Right. Compare that to black's lousy light squared bishop, which has only got 2 squares on the board, other squares where it can go to, and it's useless. And even wherever it goes, it's not going to inflict much damage. So I'd be insane to take that bishop at this point. So I figure let's bring my spare rook into the game. So now I've done 2 rook swingers, or rook lifts. Okay, so the rook lift is when you bring your rooks off of the 1st rank if you're white, or the 8th rank if you're black, and bring them into the game. And they are incredibly powerful, like we say. So I'm figuring this rook comes up to g3, maybe you can go to f3 and force that black queen to relinquish the f-file, and then that's only going to be good for me. Black plays a pawn move, which I don't think is very strong, because now I've got rook to f3, forces the queen back. My queen would love to come in and capture on g5, but she can't because it's defended by the other queen. And then I decide to come in. I just noticed that because the queen has moved in there, I can come straight in with the rook. At first I noticed the possibility of knight coming in, which would win the exchange, defended by the rook, and then I thought, oh no, look, the rook can come in and basically win the queen-rook exchange. So queen is pretty much forced to take, knight takes, king takes, and now rook takes h7 because it's protected here by my light squared bishop that's been sitting there patiently waiting to come and play its part in the game. So black again, forced to capture, and I'm not massively ahead in material, but I've got this activity. My light squared bishop is a good bishop. Black's light squared bishop is rubbish. And I have a queen. The board is opening up. The king is out in the open. My king's quite comfortable still there in his corner. Black plays king to g8, and I figure, look, I'm ahead. I'm ahead in several key ways. It's okay for me at this point, especially considering that half the board is blocked off with this fence of pawns on the light squares. That's going to take a while for those pawns to clear away. So I'm figuring that a light square bishop is worse than a knight at this point. It's exact same logic as we applied earlier on. So I capture the knight, rook captures the knight, queen captures the pawn, and the game finishes. It takes another 10 moves. King there. Queen moves onto a dark square, which gives it all those nice diagonals to play with check. And now I'm just thinking, let's push these pawns up the board. Sometimes it's just a simple plan is all you need. Black really only has a rook at this point in time. The king cannot come to any of these squares, so the king is out of the game at this point in time. So I've got a queen, a king, 3 pawns, right? On open files, all I have to do, very simple stuff, is push up. Okay, come in with check. Rook blocks the check, thereby pinning itself against the king. He could have moved the king. He's definitely got options to move that king, but he chose not to do it. So I'm just going to start pushing my king up the board to help look after these pawns. f4 is played, bishop, push h4 now. He comes in a pathetic attempt really to try and snatch a pawn on a2. Even if I'd let him take it, it wouldn't have done him any good. Bishop comes back now with a check, but again, there's no attack there. He's really playing with nothing. King comes across to f7, and I just carry on with the plan. Carry on with the plan. Bishop comes in, so now I'm looking here at queen to c7, causing problems, more forcing moves. I can also win this pawn on c6, breaking up black's pawn chain into 2 islands. And black thought there for 27 seconds and then blundered by moving his king away from his rook. Queen takes the rook, and that's really the end of the game. So let's quickly review. We want to look at the way that these rooks have come into the game. Okay, so this is where it starts. Okay, so I made this early g4 move to kick the knight back on his own side of the board. Get down, get back on your own side of the board. I'm the boss. I'm taking control of this board. And that then allows me to lift one rook, okay, and cause threats. Now black is really against the ropes. And then my other rook comes into the game. Okay, and there, you know, now we've got all my material is now focusing in on black's position, and this is really one of those. There's horrible games to try and defend because there are so many pieces coming in. I'm not just controlling the board and controlling the squares around black's king. In many cases I'm controlling them with 2 or 3 pieces. Okay, extremely hard to defend. I would have hated to be in that position as well myself. But the lesson here is you've got rooks. Sometimes all you need to do is shift a couple of pawns around, right? Make a channel to bring your rooks into the game, because that's your firepower. Don't try and win a game by with two pieces when you've got rooks there sitting around doing nothing. So always be thinking creatively. Your rooks don't have to stay on the back rank. They don't have to stay connected in that way. They can come into the board. They can work with your other pieces, right, in partnership, and cause an awful lot of trouble. So game that I wanted to share because I absolutely loved playing it. It was a tremendous win. Hope you've learnt from it as well. I'll see you next time.